Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Salon webinar, where we explore careers, research, and topics that matter to you. My name's Adam Smith, and I'm delighted to be back again. I know you're all tired of me of hosting this session. If you're in the audience today, the chances are that you're an early career researcher that has already encountered qualitative research methods and quite possibly felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. Interviews, focus groups, ethnography, thematic analysis, grounded theory, autoethnography, discourse analysis. The list keeps growing. And for those that are new to qualitative research, choosing the right method can feel like stepping into a maze. Exciting, but also quite intimidating. And in fact, it's also one of the most common questions that seems to come up in the community in particular groups is, I'm going to use this methodology. Has somebody used it? So if you want to make sure that your methods align with your research question, but at the same time, you need to consider feasibility, ethics, and the kind of insights you want to generate, then we're here to help you navigate this complex landscape. I say we, of course, I don't really mean me. I mean our two brilliant experts this evening who have joined us. We have the incredible Dr. Martha Pollard and the unstoppable Dr. Alys Griffiths. Hi, both of you. Hello. Alys is a senior research fellow at the University of Sheffield and who has spent a decade, is that been a decade already, Alys, in dementia research and has recently expanded her focus to motor neuron disease. She's worked extensively on developing and evaluating interventions using a range of qualitative research methods and is going to share some of what she's learned with us this evening. And next we have the brilliant Dr. Martha Pollard, a counsellor and mindfulness teacher who's returned to academia for a second doctorate. Once wasn't enough, decided to go through the punishment twice over. Her research explores freedom in dementia caregiving, drawing from personal reflections, philosophical frameworks, and policy implications through the lens of liberation theology and human rights. Wow. Two very qualified speakers for us this evening. Together, as I said, they're going to help demystify qualitative research methods and offer some practical insights from their experience. And for those that are new to the salon, how this works is each of our speakers are going to do 10-15 minutes and give a presentation. Then we're going to have some questions that I've worked out just for tonight as well. We're also going to have a fun quiz, which I hope you'll all stick around and participate in as well. We're going to test your knowledge of research methodology this evening. So make sure you're around for that. And it's a chance also for you to ask your questions. So I think that's probably enough for me. Alys has very kindly agreed to go first. Are you still up for that, Alys? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Then I will hand over to you. I'll stick around. You're going to use slides, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick around while we make sure that works, and then I'll turn my camera and mic off. Thank you very much to everybody in the audience for joining us this evening.
There we go. Can you see that now?
We can. Thank you, Alys.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm just going to talk for around 10 minutes around choosing your qualitative research method or methods. So first, thinking about when you're defining which method you should use. Obviously, there are more common and less common ones, but the first step is choosing the method. When you're choosing a method is defining your focus and defining exactly what your research question is, then considering what the most appropriate method would be to answer these. But you also might want to consider things around feasibility, such as ethics, as Adam just mentioned, time limitations, and also what resources you have available. So what I'll be doing tonight is just talking quickly through a few different types of methods and thinking about why they may be more or less appropriate for someone with dementia. So the most common ones that probably everyone's really familiar with are interviews, which are appropriate to be used when we want to explore people's experiences, but want to understand what's important to them in their own words. And traditionally, people thought that maybe this would be difficult for people with dementia to do, but over the past kind of decade or so, people have started to really value the experience of conducting interviews with people with dementia. And obviously, you might want to give some consideration to adaptations that you would want to give, and we'll come on to those later. Focus groups bring a group of people together to look at their attitudes and interactions, and these are appropriate when you want to understand how different people think about things, but also let them argue that out between them to help them come to a conclusion or to help give you advice, for example, when you're co-designing an intervention, being able to let the people who would be ultimately using the intervention think through some of the issues that you would have to think through on your own. Focus groups might be a really good option. Observations are where I tend to fall, so I do a lot of ethnographic research and involve you recording behaviour and having conversations, usually informal or kind of in situ short interviews, in a naturally occurring setting, usually without changing anything, to understand the interaction between the person and their environment. And so these are obviously really helpful for people with dementia who might struggle to communicate verbally, or who might struggle to recall information in a way that would allow them to participate in an interview or a focus group. So now thinking about some things that might be a bit less commonly used, qualitative surveys are increasingly used, particularly during the pandemic. A lot of qualitative surveys were sent out. The reasons that these can be quite helpful for people with dementia is that they're less daunting than an interview. The reason they can be good for you is because they're quick and very inexpensive. And you might be able to get a larger sample. You might be able to get a bigger sample from across the UK or even worldwide. However, they can be difficult for people with dementia to complete. Obviously, you're expecting people to have a certain level of ability to either log into a system and complete the survey, or to receive a survey by post, fill it in and post it back to you. But don't let that put you off doing them. They can be really valuable. I guess the biggest limitation from my perspective is that you can't extend what people have said. You tend to get thinner data because people give you a short answer, rather than when they're face-to-face with you, they might have a lot more to say. Researcher-directed diaries are something that can be really enjoyable. So you would give the participant a diary, and this might be a written diary, it might be a recorded diary by video or audio, and it allows people to record their thoughts over a specific period. And so these can be used when you just want to understand something that's happening every day. You might want to track what's it like to live with dementia over a week post-diagnosis or a month post-diagnosis. And these can be used in a situation where you want people with dementia to be able to just record at a suitable time for them. You don't want this to be invasive into their daily life, and can reduce the problems with recall that some people can experience when they're having trouble with their short-term memory. And you might be able to collect people's diary and then do an interview with them to elaborate on what they said. Or you might be able to integrate it with medical records to do documentary analysis, or you might want to observe people and see how their experiences differ with you there versus when they're doing their diary at home. However, there is a lot of energy required for participants to do this, and while it can be a really fantastic source of data collection for us as researchers, actually it can be quite tiring for people if they're having to record themselves and save it and send that back to you. There's lots of different ways that you can do that, though. So if you give people a specific phone or a laptop and they've not got to send anything back to you, and you go and collect that, there's lots of ways you can reduce the burden for people. But this kind of method is really helpful when you're thinking about what do I want to know about people's day-to-day life, rather than wanting them to reflect on something that's happened previously. And then, as I mentioned, you can do documentary analysis. So that this might be medical records, or it might be looking at written diaries that people already use. And these can be really quick and easy to access compared to completing primary data collection yourself. And recently it's become more popular to use creative methods within dementia research. And so lots of these more creative methods are really dementia friendly compared to the traditional interviews, particularly long interviews. And it might include lots of different ways of people expressing themselves, such as drawing or creating something, writing a poem together, or Lego serious play. So we used Lego serious play last year within a series of co-production workshops to encourage people to express their feelings about having had therapy. And we received some really beautiful sculptures, I guess you'd call them, models is probably the term, that people had developed, demonstrating how they had progressed through therapy, and how one person, they were in a kind of jeep and they were running away from the skeletons, and they talked about how therapy had helped them to turn the jeep and embrace the skeletons behind them. which were like little Lego skeletons. Some people really engage with it. For some people, it's absolutely not for them. And so facilitating it can be quite tricky because you need to manage people who have lots of different levels of willingness to engage with the process. However, for people who might struggle to communicate verbally, or who might struggle to be asked direct questions, or for people who want to work with their care partner, these methods can be a really positive experience. We did another recent thing where we asked people to draw their ideal healthcare professional, and some people drew a picture, some people did a stick person and then wrote the key things around them, and others talked about the healthcare professional and their family around them. So it enabled us to obtain information that we would have struggled to obtain by just asking the person directly. And then finally, thinking about ethnography. So this draws together lots of different qualitative methods. So you might have interviews or informal conversations, observations. You might bring in some participatory activities like those creative methods. But it's really flexible to the ability of the participants, and that's why it works quite well for people with dementia. But obviously, you have to consider your positionality within this, and what your theoretical perspective is and how you bring that to the research, which you would do for all qualitative methods, but it's particularly important within ethnography. So ethnography might be a suitable research method when you want to draw together the opinions of lots of different types of participants, but you're not going to be able to do that in a consistent or systematic manner. So just to talk quickly, a colleague of mine, Lewis, is a fantastic Miro board whiz, and has used these really successfully to look at really engaging different individuals within an online session together. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of how you can engage people to complete sticky notes and put them where they belong on this screen. Or you might want to look at how a timeline of how things change over time, and so people would move the information to where it fitted within this timeline. Or this one where you could ask people to move things from the ideas pool up at the top down to where they fit within the pathway and whether they're useful or less useful. And these sorts of things can be helpful for people who might, again, struggle to communicate verbally, but would be able to engage in this sort of process. So then I just wanted to touch quickly on supporting people with dementia to participate in research. So obviously people might have issues with their speech, they might have issues with their mobility in terms of coming to the location where you are, and they might also experience fatigue. So completing the consenting process can be challenging, participating in the data collection can also be challenging, but arranging the interview or the observation can be tiring as well. So thinking about supporting participants, being really clear that you want to work with them and you will support their participation is really important, but also checking in regularly while they're taking part. But also being prepared that as a researcher, you need to have flexibility for plans to be changed at the very last minute, and tailoring your approach for each person's needs. And this is really important when you're thinking about you're choosing your research method in terms of what's going to work for that person. If you're working with a group, actually, are you able to facilitate a group of 8 people in a focus group, for example, with 8 different needs around communication and mobility? Some people might prefer online, some people might prefer face-to-face, and how you manage that to get the right method for you, but also the right method for your participants is really important. So then just a couple of quick strategies on how to manage these. As I said, establishing how people wish to communicate and what their preferences are. Adapting paperwork. Can we get verbal consent rather than written consent? And within your ethics applications and your protocols, giving as many flexible options as possible for participants, so that you're not really stuck to one way of collecting informed consent, for example, that might not work for everybody. Where possible, we offer people questions in advance if they're taking part in an interview or a focus group or an informal conversation. Or even if we're doing something like Lego Serious Play, it may also be worthwhile giving people an idea of the sort of models you'd be asking them to make. Allowing extra time for people if they're using any form of voice software or any other software that's new to them. Allowing people to have a support person present, which might be a family member or a friend. and also giving a mixed approach. So having pre-prepared questions and allowing people to prepare their answers to them, but also being willing to engage in follow-up questions with people. And finally, thinking about managing sensitive topics. A lot of the research that we do with people with dementia is around sensitive topics. So thinking about that when you're selecting your research method. So for example, if you were discussing continence care, people might be more comfortable discussing that one-to-one than in a group setting. But they also might not really be willing to engage in making a Lego serious play model about continence care in a way that they might be willing to do that around hydration and nutrition. And with people with dementia, often participant withdrawal can be quite complex if people are unsure about the methods, the time they'll be in the research, and doing kind of more at-home methods such as participant diaries or anything where you'd be observing someone in their own home. Those power imbalances and those abilities to withdraw can be difficult. So ensuring that we're regularly reminding people, of their right to withdraw is really important. Thank you. That was all I had to say.
Thanks, Will. That was brilliant, really informative as well. And I love how you've drawn on some made use of so many different methods. So I had a quick question, which is when you mentioned the Lego method, which I've seen a few kind of posts around on social media, but I've never read any publications or anything where this has been applied. So when you kind of decide, okay, this is the methodology I'm going to employ on this, I don't know, you've kind of gone away, you've done some background reading. How do you teach yourself to do that? And how, answer, if we can look at that first. Well, how do you teach yourself this new, because I assume you'd not used that before.
Yeah, well, as with everything, there is a paid-for training course of, I think it's 4 or 5 days. So they have kind of named facilitators around the world who do the official training. And then once you've done the training, you are a user and can go out and work with people and your colleagues and can kind of disseminate to others around you, but they wouldn't be officially trained users, but they can work with you to do it.
Okay, so that's and I'm guessing, do you then talk to other people that have obviously did you have the official training then?
No, I'm not officially trained. I'm a sly user.
I'd love to know in the audience if anybody else has used that particular methodology. As I mentioned at the start, quite often a new question is somebody, I think, decides to use a methodology and then really have you finding it useful to have a chat with somebody that's used that around it? How do you ever get worried that how much does it matter how purely you stick to, do you think, whether that's any of these methodologies, particularly the creative ones, about the purity of sticking to whatever's written down as opposed to putting your own interpretation on that? How do you find that?
I think people have really strong opinions on it, don't they? So we were just away working with a colleague who's an anthropologist, and her kind of view on research methods was really different to mine, and I hadn't really acknowledged it before, that I was very much like, I will adapt things to work for the person with dementia. I will be flexible to whatever their needs are, and actually if they'd prefer to do that over the phone than in person, even though everyone else is doing that in person, or if they'd rather do it across 5 days, I'll ask one question every day. Whereas she has very much come from an anthropology background where you are embedded in that population or whatever, and you follow the way that you have been taught to do it. It was really interesting because I feel like within the bubble of healthcare dementia research, flexibility is kind of really praised and really encouraged. So that was my first kind of reflection on it being something that maybe not everybody does.
And I can see where, particularly if you're at an earlier stage or you're at the start of your PhD, I guess that's where confidence comes in. I guess the more experience you get, the more confident you become, or that the adaptions, the way you're adapting is okay, as opposed to maybe if you're lacking a little bit more in confidence at the start, you're kind of worried all the time that you're going off piste or that you're not following the rules, which is where I guess mentors and your supervisors or knowing somebody who's really expert in that methodology can give you some confidence and chat to. Thank you very much, Alys. We're gonna, just a reminder to everybody who's watching, do post your questions. Anything on qualitative research methodology or on the ethics or retention or all these other topics that Alys touched upon in her talk, do post your questions. And I'm gonna hand over to Martha now, and we're gonna hear from Martha, who's gonna give us her tips.
Oh, thank you. I was really pleased to hear that. There's some of the things that you raised, Alys, that touch on some of the things that I will say as well. So that's really helpful. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see how that goes.
While we're waiting, do you want a couple of stats? Let me throw you a couple of stats out there.
Thanks.
So the number of qualitative research articles published in health and social sciences increased by 80% in the last 20 years. Who knew that it had become? And a survey shows that 70% of qualitative researchers use interviews, 50% focus groups, and 30% ethnography. That doesn't surprise me so much. I'll give you one more, because this will be a painful one that many of our audience have had to cope with. Transcribing 1 hour of qualitative interviews on average takes 4 to 6 hours to transcribe those qualitative interviews. Unless you're like me and you cheat and you use a service called rev.com, they're not a sponsor, but if they'd like to sponsor us, I'd take it, because they transcribe all of our podcasts into captions and transcriptions as well, but you do have to pay for it, so save yourself some pain. But there you go. Thank you very much, Martha. Your slides look wonderful. I can see those now. Okay. Over to you.
That's great. Yeah, I can confirm about transcription of interviews. And the first one I tried to transcribe actually took me 17 hours because I was new to it. And then I discovered ways of working with it a little more easily after that. But yes, it's time consuming and very informative. So I've titled this "Choosing a Suitable Qualitative Research Method: 3 Non-Systematic Tips." I'm going to come to the 3 non-systematic tips later. I'm going to tell you what they are first, and then tell you about the research that I did and why I'm landing at this non-systematic tips for ways to help you choose your research method. So my 3 tips are: start walking, find your walking companions, and trust your instincts. But I'm going to come back to them and tell you what actually happened first in my own research. I am a PhD student, so I'm writing up this year and I'll be submitting this autumn, and I'm in the middle of writing chapter 5 just now. So in essence, really, I've chosen qualitative methods once for this particular study that I'm working on now. And I would say that qualitative methods found me rather than the other way around. I have a background in psychology and epidemiology and quantitative methods. And in the 1990s, I got a PhD in that and went into academia. What actually happened over time was that the community aspect of the work that I was doing in my research really captured my heart. And I moved into community work instead. And I did care work from about 2013 onwards. And then also in my family, I heard and saw impacts of dementia diagnosis on people's freedom in the context of caring. And my central question about that became, what does freedom mean to people with dementia and carers? And because I was really interested in exploring meaning, well, that really needs qualitative methods. You need to be able to learn about that from the people who are experiencing what they're experiencing. I'm a part-time student, so I started in 2018, just in December 2018 was my beginning point. And what I planned to do at that stage and had developed by the time the pandemic came in 2020 was different from what I actually did. And this speaks to what you talked about, Alys, of the need to be flexible. both in methods, but also in working with ethics panels and feasibility. So the pandemic arrived in 2020, and there was of course widespread loss of freedoms and major impacts in dementia and in caring. And my project ended up being focused around carers, people who were unpaid carers of people living with dementia, and paid carers of people living with dementia, because for ethics reasons, which are too complex to include here, for ethics reasons, I wasn't able to include people living with dementia because I needed to do interviews remotely. So what I did was I did interviews online, and I was exploring meaning of freedom with family carers and care staff. So I had a semi-structured interview where the first question was, what does freedom mean to you? And then the interview went where it went. And Alys, you also mentioned about being able to send questions in advance. Well, some people wanted that. They appreciated seeing the questions in advance. Other people said they didn't want that. They were happy just to come up and chat. The interview could go where it will. I didn't necessarily ask all of the questions of all of the people, because what mattered to me was hearing what was important to them. But we began with this question about freedom. The protocol for my study required that the study was conducted remotely. I couldn't see people in person at that time. And what I did was one-to-one interviews. And for methodology as a whole for the study, I explored many potential methods along the way. So to ground these interviews in something, to put them in the context, I looked at, was I going to be using grounded theory? Was I going to be using thematic analysis? Was I going to be using interpretive phenomenological analysis? And all of these had particular positives and negatives in relation to my study, but none of them really seemed to fit. And I actually found my methodological home in something called frenetic iterative analysis, which I also adapted, which fortunately the methodology itself suggests is a very good idea to do. And I found this method in the textbook of Sarah J. Tracy on qualitative research method. And in this methods textbook, I found a crucial companion to the work that I was doing. I found information, ideas, and ways of working that were really helpful to me. So this methodology alternates between considering existing theories in the field and research questions on the one hand, and also working directly with what you're seeing in the interviews on the other hand. And so you're going back and forth all the time between those two things. This methodology also recognizes that researchers have a lens maybe that they're looking through, a sensitizing concept and research questions. So my sensitizing concept was freedom. And within freedom, I was looking kind of in two directions about that. One was human rights, and the other one was liberation theology. And so those were important to me. And to be able to work with the theoretical standpoint that I already came to it with, yet also be able to work with the data that was coming in from what people were telling me was really important. So this methodology really suited my topic quite well. I needed to adapt it though, even so, because I got stuck. There was a point at which the way that it suggested that you might do this in terms of coding the interview transcripts, I got absolutely stuck and I couldn't do it. I wasn't progressing. And so I ended up adapting that part of it to do something different, a way of working with text that I was already familiar with from another setting. And I brought that on board to help me work with my data in a way that made sense within the context of my project. I really like Sarah J. Tracy's work because she talks about the importance of being able to do that. And I found also after I had brought in this further method, I went searching for articles. It turned out someone else had actually done it already. So I found my seminal go-to paper after I'd actually found this methodology myself. And so there is a precedent there, which does help me. And so there was another companion there that I found. Now in my study, what's emerging from it now is I'm talking about principles, and the overarching principles that emerge from my study are about common humanity and community solidarity in dementia caring, and how important that is to counter experiences of voicelessness. And what Alys was talking about there in terms of ways of working with people living with dementia in research, it's so important because this invisibility is so prevalent. And this absolutely showed through in my study all the time, including with carers and paid carers who also feel invisible within the system. And so this common humanity and community solidarity are really important. I've got some major findings now that I'm writing about at the moment about what it means in terms of common humanity and community solidarity and spaces where that can happen. And all of that has been enabled by my research methodology of frenetic iterative analysis and the themes that are really showing up time and again in the people that I spoke with. So I mentioned these 3 non-systematic tips of choosing methodology. The first one was start walking, and that was because, you know, having come from the research background that I did, which was epidemiology, like everything is about the methodology in epidemiology. You choose it first, you know how it works, you know, the rules are in place. And in this way of working with qualitative analysis, I found that I needed to start walking first. I had to just go. And then as I was going, things needed to be adapted along the way. I was learning things that were really important. And so things were adjusted as I went. The second one is find your walking companions. So some of these I had at the beginning. They're my research supervisors. I had 2 at the beginning, and then I added a third one who was able to bring a dimension to be able to help with aspects that were coming to bear on the project that actually ended up happening after COVID came. And my walking companions also included all this academic literature, but not only that, it was also conversations that I had with people, you know, along the way, things that I was reading in other sources, my research, my own diary of things. So all of these were companions to me, and they all really, really mattered. So I would say find your walking companions. And then the third one is trust your instincts, your learned instincts. And this is, if you're stuck, there's a reason. It's not that you're failing. There's probably something that will come to light that makes something make sense in a way that you couldn't before you got to the stuck point. And if you trust your instinct, the way will show itself to you. And so you can be continually amazed about what actually does emerge from the research that you're doing, and what that can show you about the messages that come from it and the difference that it can make. And that's me.
Oh God, Martha, it came to a more abrupt end than I was expecting. I was typing a message in.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Before I come, I'm gonna go to the questions we've had from our audience. Because they're the most important ones, not the questions that I think are important. So let's go to those questions. I'll turn the gallery back on. So our first question comes from Diana, who asks, what kind of data can you extract from creative methods, and what data analysis methods can you use? Alys, you used creative methods.
Yeah. So it kind of really depends on what you collect. So for example, when we do Lego Serious Play, we also audio record people's narrative of what the model they've developed and ask them to describe it, and you can ask questions about it. So you almost do kind of a mini informal interview with people about it, and then you can analyze that with a narrative analysis, thematic analysis, any of the usual, I guess, qualitative analyses you would do. And similarly, you could do content analysis of which words appear in multiple people's narratives. Again, with diaries, if you transcribed them, you could use kind of standard qual analyses there. With things like pictures and drawing and poetry, obviously it's very different. And there, I guess maybe the focus wouldn't be on analysis. When we've used those things before, it's mainly been to help us understand people's experiences and to talk about those within the paper and to maybe summarize. So rather than doing a formal analysis, we'll summarize how people presented something or how people spoke about something in a less formally analysed way.
Do you use video and things with that as well? Would you typically record some of those sessions?
Yeah, if you can get everyone's permission, that's where it can get a bit tricky, because if some people in the room are more or less comfortable with being recorded, it can be more difficult to just video the whole thing. So we tend to go with audio recording of photos. But there are times that we've video recorded as well.
Yeah. I don't know, Martha, did you have any experience with that as well?
Not in research, no. Used to use creative methods. I was doing support work. I worked in social and emotional support of people living with dementia and carers in a weekly support group. We use creative methods there all the time, both for fun activities, for things that people could explore in various ways, but also for feedback. And in feedback, the creative methods were really useful to be able to engage everybody in a way that they could be involved in. So like stuff like post-it notes. I was really interested that, in the online way that you showed about that, Alys, so using post-it notes or smiley faces to be able to get a sense of what people were trying to communicate. I never needed to turn that into a research report. I was able to use that in order to shape the sessions that we were building, but it was very, very helpful.
Do you think those methods, I guess also as well, this comes back to you again, Alys, with your work in motor neurone disease, do those methods, are they particularly helpful where somebody's physical abilities are impaired? Particularly language, I guess, and communication problems. Because interviews are tricky, right? I mean, you can't, if you want in the first-hand perspective of, lived experience with the condition.
Yeah, I think so. And I really kind of do push against the narrative of people with dementia can't take part in interviews, they can't recall. So I try and use interviews wherever possible. But actually, the first time we used the LEGO series play, so it's my colleague Warren Donnellan, based at Liverpool. So he's the trained person who bought it. And I thought people might think it was a bit kind of childish. It wasn't really for them. But I was really surprised by how well people engaged with it, and actually how much people were able to discuss the narratives around what they developed. So I think any population you're working with who may struggle with communication, being able to offer them lots of different ways to participate, that might be making a model, drawing something, as Martha said, moving post-it notes around where you've not got to create the content with your words. Anything like that is a positive for people where communication can be challenging. I guess then you also have to be considerate of people who might be physically struggling to do things. So obviously making Lego is quite a challenging task if you're struggling with arthritis or Raynaud's or anything like that. And so, yeah, what we've tended to do is have different options available. So that day we had 5 different tables with 5 different tasks. One was a focus group based exercise, one was drawing, one was writing, one was Lego serious play, and the final table was a kind of quiet, reflective space where people could go and talk to a person in a less structured way. And so having all those different opportunities available, let people kind of gravitate to the tasks that matched their preferences, but also their abilities, without it being kind of a stigmatizing, oh, you can't do that, so you don't go to that table. So I think having lots of different options for people can be a really positive and welcoming experience.
I guess that's where the mixed methods can be particularly useful. And Warren is a member of our community as well. He's been a speaker on the salon in the past. So if you look up Warren, sorry, Warren, if you're watching this later and I've just gotten you spammed, but if anybody wants to know more about Lego methodology, if you at Warren in the chat, he'll get a ping alert to say he's been messaged, and hopefully he'll pop out and answer questions. So it sounds like a really fascinating wheel. I might do a session on that again in the future. Let's take our next question, which is an anonymous one this time. It says, any tips on the practicalities of gaining engagement from participants? Example for video ethnography. If recruitment is a challenge, what approach might offer a next best fit, or how do you encourage harder to reach populations? I guess, Martha, that's, you were, I mean, I know, Alys, you were there plugging away during the pandemic as well. But it sounds like, Martha, you came up against these challenges. What do you have a reply for Anonymous?
Yeah, I guess my challenge was slightly different in terms of how I was going to get in touch with people. So that was interesting for sure. In terms of video ethnography, so in my study, I might have used ethnography if I'd done what I had originally intended, which was to be working with people within the context of a specialist dementia unit, which is a hospital unit where people are being treated and they're usually locked. So I was going to be working with people and exploring their experiences of freedom there. And I might have used ethnography for that, observation. And actually, Sarah J. Tracy's book, she's an ethnographer primarily, is a very good resource in terms of talking about the issues that you might need to navigate by way of thinking about the group that you're going to be working with. And I found what she had to say on negotiating access really helpful. So maybe I have a tip here, a recommendation of checking out her book, because I found it so helpful in negotiating what I was trying to do, even though that's not actually what I did with ethnography. I did something else, but she has some really useful guidance on it.
Did you have anything to add, Alys, on that one? Do you need me to remind you the question?
No.
Gaining
I guess just so where we've had situations where somebody doesn't want to be filmed, for example, we'll ask whether they're happy to be audio recorded. If you're recording someone, for example, in their own home, making them aware before you start of what can be seen. So we've done, I guess, often done filming on tablets rather than cameras, because people can see reflected back to them exactly what's being filmed, but giving people the opportunity to move things in the room, or to choose to have the camera placed higher because they don't want they've not put their best trousers on, they're in their pajamas and they only want you to see up to here. But like thinking about all the practical things that put the person back in control over what is recorded. And then if they don't want to be video recorded, then audio recorded. And if they don't want to be audio recorded, then notes. So we kind of like take a step down approach where we ask people for, I guess, the most invasive way of collecting the data and then step down. But the other thing I think is being really clear about why you need video, not just audio. So explaining to people exactly what you'll be doing with that. So for example, if you're looking at the way that people communicate and how the person supports the person with dementia is supported by their family member, explaining that this method helps us to understand that the things that people don't say, I found to be really useful before. Just explain why we can't just audio record this, but also explaining where that will go, that no one else will see it, that as soon as we've transcribed it and we've got the information that we need, we'll delete it. Previously, we've explained that we would like to use it in training videos, but that we'd blur people's faces, so they'd be seen as a person, but their face would be blurred, and giving people examples of what that would look like so people can see what their video would be used like. I found that really helpful before.
Yeah, I can see that. You both mentioned changing methods. I've got a question here, which is, at what point when things have gone wrong, you've selected your method, you've started, and then you realize at some point this isn't really getting me what I needed. In your experience, have you then changed or adapted or added another method and stuck with it, but you've already collected some data by then? How do you deal with that situation where you realize you've got the wrong method? I'll go to Martha first, because you did change your mind, didn't you?
I did. Well, yeah, I changed my mind. Yes and no. I think I felt very fortunate to be working with a methodology where her recommendation about things is that you say that you've worked with phonetic analysis informed by X, Y, and Z. So there's kind of explicit permission within her approach to things, which this says, look, if you need to adapt it, provided you can tie that to the reasons why you need the adaptation, why the adaptation makes sense, then the important thing is what you're able to say about your data because of what you've done. you know, that it makes sense within your overall theoretical framework. And in mine, this research lens of liberation theology was where this hinge of what I changed really worked within the context of what I was doing. Because the way that I was familiar with working with text is a methodology, if you will, of working with text. And it's usually scriptural text that is a way of slow reading of it and highlighting words and phrases and then building up the meaning of it from there. And so I drew on that. And in other types of studies, drawing on that particular methodology is not probably going to make very much sense, but in the context of what I was doing with this particular research lens, it definitely did. And when I found prior research that had been done in 2019 that used that particular methodology for the same reason that I used it, it really gave me confidence in the particular change that I'd made. So it was really helpful for me to be able to put it all together within the theoretical frameworks and be able to make the case for why I've chosen that and why it's helpful.
Thank you. What about you, Alys?
Yeah, I guess the point, the thing I would always try and do is get ethical approval with as much flexibility as possible. So talk around conversations, which may be an interview, maybe a focus group, maybe an informal conversation, to try and adapt.
That's cunning.
That's, again, something I learned from
Leave yourself some room to maneuver with ethics. Don't be like very specific in saying, I'm going to do this interview. If you talk about discussion.
And similar with observations, so saying like where possible we will video record these, if not we will audio, if not we will make notes. So you've got that flexibility and you've not got to go back every time somebody asks for something slightly different.
Yeah, that's very good. I'll take up we've got another question. Do keep your questions coming if you've got them, and then we'll have our quiz, and then so let's bring this question in, which is from Diana, who asks, do you use control groups in qualitative research? If so, do you establish inclusion criteria for controls? If not, how do you perform the data analysis? What about you, Alys? I'm guessing...
Generally no, which is the answer. So no, yeah. I guess we're trying to seek to understand people's experiences as an individual in the world in which they live. And so it might be, I guess, if you're doing a process evaluation of a clinical trial, you might speak to people who did and didn't receive the intervention. So from a trial's perspective, they may be considered a control, but generally we would analyze the data as a data set of a population of people who exist within whatever the setting we want to examine is. And so you perform the data analysis by understanding or seeking to understand their experiences rather than trying to draw comparisons. You might seek to see similarities across people within themes, but actually celebrating uniqueness and understanding how that person has got to where they are and what their experiences are is all part of the fun of qualitative analysis.
So if you're developing an intervention of some kind, say like we're doing some work at the moment with a group in Nottingham that have had access, a group of people living with dementia have had access to an online community support service. I guess if you were writing up the evaluation of that intervention, you then look at a population of people that haven't had that, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
and you might do that yourself, or you might draw on existing literature that says this is what people usually feel post-diagnosis, and then you might talk about how your intervention group or your population differ from that and what this intervention might have added to people's lives that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
I would imagine that's quite a hard sell as well, to say, can I, you didn't have this, I want to come and talk to you about what kind of support you get. Yeah. Shall we have our quiz? Oh, sorry, Martha.
I'm going to answer that. And I was about, yeah. So I actually have a comparison of two groups, if you will. I've got unpaid carers and paid carers. I suppose I might call that more triangulation. I was interested in different people's perspectives. So rather than it be a control group, the clinical trial has such close criteria for, I was interested in the different sets of things that people might be talking about within those two contexts. But I wouldn't, the terminology is totally different from what that means in qualitative research than what it means within the context of quantitative research.
I like that. The idea, yeah, you're kind of triangulating your responses. That's a good way to put it. I'm determined to do this quiz because I made it. Whether you like it or not. So audience participation is encouraged as well. And we're going to test Alys and Martha's knowledge here. So I've got 5 questions. We'll see how long they take. So get ready with your questions, your answers. It's multiple choice, so it's going to be easy, and the top marks. There's no prizes. But the first question is so I'm going to give you a scenario. You want to understand how a group of medical students adapt to stress during the first year of their study. You decide to immerse yourself in their daily experiences. What methodology are you using? You're going to immerse yourself in their experience. Are you A, using a case study, B, an ethnography, C, narrative research, or D, focus groups? So is it A, B, C, or D? Case study, ethnography, narrative research, or focus group? Answers in the chat. I'll give you 5 seconds. Anybody gonna answer? And then I'm going to come to Martha first of all to say, what kind of methodology are you using in that situation, Martha?
I'm going to say B, which is ethnography.
And Alys?
If I've remembered correctly of which is which.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I'm saying ethnography, yeah.
What about you in the audience? Let's have a look. The audience says, oh, nobody in the... Oh, wait, here we go. See, they're waiting to hear you first. They agree. Be ethnography and you'll all be correct. So next question. You're conducting a study on how people with dementia experience everyday decision making. You ask each participant to tell their life story in words. What methodology is this? Is it A, discourse analysis, B, I can't say that word. Phenomenology. Say it, Alys. Yeah.
Phenomenology.
Phrenology, narrative research, or grounded theory. So you're going to ask each participant to tell their life story in their own words. Discourse analysis, phenomenology, narrative research, or grounded theory. Anybody? Audience? I'm going to go to Alys first of all this time to answer this one. Are you Googling it?
No, I wish I was. I think it depends what you're doing with the data, but I'm going to say narrative.
Martha agrees. Does the audience agree?
Yeah,
the audience agrees.
But yeah, I like that. But, but having had narratives, you might do something different with them. So I like that.
It is narrative. You're quite right. Well done. Third one. You record and analyze conversations in an online mental health forum to explore how people discuss anxiety. What method are you using? Is it thematic analysis, ethnography, discourse analysis, or grounded theory? Back to you, Martha, on that one, and the audience, of course. Recording and analyzing conversations in an online mental health forum to discuss anxiety. What methodology are you using?
So my guess is discourse analysis is the likeliest.
What do you think, Alys? Thematic analysis, ethnography, discourse analysis, or grounded theory?
Discourse analysis.
Discourse analysis. Our audience participant has guessed A, and they'd be incorrect, and you'd both be right. So you're proving yourself to be experts. You're right. That's discourse analysis. The fourth one, you want to develop a theory about how people transition from being PhD students to being independent researchers, and you collect data through interviews and then code and refine themes over time. What methodology is this? Is it thematic analysis, case study, grounded theory, or ethnography? Who answered first last time? I think it was Alys. We're going to invite the audience as well, of course. So develop a theory about how people transition over time. Going to collect data through interviews, code and refine themes over time. Thematic analysis, case study, grounded theory. Martha, go.
Most likely thematic analysis.
Alys?
I'm going to go grounded theory.
You'd be right. It's grounded theory. Alys, you're on 4. Martha, you're on 3. No, we weren't keeping scores. Last question. And Alys, Alys and Yvonne both got that one right. Well done, Alys and Yvonne. Last question. You bring together a small group of caregivers to discuss their experience with support services. You guide the discussion, but let it flow naturally. What method are you using? Is it in that word I can't say again? Focus groups, narrative research, or ethnography? And Alys is going to go first. So you're going to guide the discussion with a group of caregivers, but let the conversation flow naturally.
I'm going focus group.
Focus groups. Martha, do you agree? Yeah. The audience agrees, and you'd all be correct. It is focus groups. Well done. That's our fun quiz. Alys, well done. 5 out of 5. Martha, you were so close. To be quite honest, I did my background reading before hosting this, and we also recorded 2 series of a really great podcast which didn't get enough listens, so I posted links in the chat, so do go back and look at those. We had this some amazing experts, and a particular one who joined us in many of those episodes called Karen Hughes from Leeds, which is where Alys lives, or is from. You're in Leeds. And we covered lots, and so in doing our background reading for that and for today, I kind of went around and looked, and we tried to match an expert with somebody that was using that methodology every time. And what amazed me was how close some of these things were. I think I've been told these days that anybody who's taking their written driving test exam, that the multiple choice are the hardest because A and B sound like the same thing. And some of these methods, when I read through them, seem so close to each other that it almost could seem like a matter of interpretation as to whether something was grounded theory, or is it this, or is it that. And from what I can gather, there are also so many new methods, like you touched on the Lego one again, emerging all the time. And so just keeping on top of the methodologies that are available is quite tricky. I gather there are 20 now standardly recognized qualitative methods that are distinctly separate. Actually, it's 15 to 20, depending on which paper you read. And then there are variations on that and the mixed methods, and you get up to nearer to 50 when you get there. So I think the main point there is there's always going to be a method out there for you. But I took all of the texts from our 2 series of that podcast, and some blogs and content we've got, and I put all that into ChatGPT. And I said, ChatGPT, give me what you think are the 10 top tips on choosing. So this isn't from the internet. This is from our real life, genuine content on what you should do when choosing the right qualitative research method. So let's go through these and see if Alys and Martha have highlighted these. I think they have. So top tip number 1 was start with your research question. Your question should drive your method, not the other way around. And I think both of you made that point really well. Number 2, don't try to use everything. So focus on a small number of methods, or 1 or 2. Don't try to use all of them, and don't try to master them all at once either. So there's lots of resources out there for training on methodology and people you can approach in our community as well. Number 3, consider feasibility. Some methods, like ethnography, require extended time and access, so be realistic, particularly I think during your PhD, on how much time you've got for this. So be realistic. Number 4, think about depth versus breadth. Interviews can offer deep insights, while focus groups offer diverse perspectives. So think about whether it is really deep insights you want, or whether you're looking for the overall themes. Number 5, plan for transcription and analysis time. Qualitative research is more time consuming than you will expect, so do allow time for that. Next was seek advice from experienced researchers, which I think everybody would agree on. Consider ethical and practical challenges. I think we've had some great tips from both Martha and Alys on ethics. Keeping it broad sounds like a great idea. Be reflexive. Your own background influences qualitative research. So acknowledge and manage bias, which I think is important to take, particularly when we're always so driven to research things that we're personally passionate about. And I think managing that bias can just be aware of that. Test your method before committing. Run a pilot study, small samples, so you can change if you need to. And finally, stay open to adaptation, which I think Martha and Alys both touched on really well, which is you may need to adjust your approach once data collection begins, to be flexible. Thank you so much. I don't know, do they sound like the right tips? Great. Then be sure to check out all the resources on the Dementia Researcher website, where we have lots for you. Thank you so much, Alys and Martha, for giving up so much of your Wednesday evening to join us. I'm really grateful. We're going to look forward to seeing you all again. Alys has been on our podcast lots of times as well and has talked about some of your research. So do go check out those podcasts. The most recent was at the Motor Neurone Disease, where Alys hosted a great podcast talking about the highlights from the M&D conference in Montreal. Next week, we're going to be back again. This time, I'm looking quickly. We're going to completely shifting direction. It's on Wednesday lunchtime, and it's about how to talk to science and present to young people. So if you've been asked to go back to your school or give a talk at the local high school or on the high street or do a pint of science, something like that, join us next week for how to present to a younger audience. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And we'll see you all again next week in the salon. Thank you. Bye. Come on, Alys, wave. Bye. See you later.